That's another thing that I can't really put words to. It was just something I experienced. And then I took in at a level beyond words that it's possible for men to lead well. And these days, the word patriarchy gets scapegoated for everything that's wrong with the world. And I challenge that, because what it actually refers to is the leadership of the men, which we need now more than ever, and not in a dominance seeking way, but in a self-dominating way. Men need to dominate themselves so that they can then serve better.
Welcome to the Grand Rising Experience. What if I told you that everything you desire lives inside of your capacity to forgive? Join me, Nicole Connor, your host and founder of Grand Rising, as I follow my curiosity and journey deep into the art and science of self-forgiveness to not only answer, but embody one simple yet profoundly existential question. What is self-forgiveness? I believe that the experience of seeking answers to this one question has the power to unlock the essence of your own grand rising, a powerful reconciliation and reconnection of body, soul, and purpose. Walk beside me as I commit to learning out loud with spiritual teachers, thought leaders, healers, and everyday men and women on a quest to better understand what patterns and cycles keep being reborn, whose only known medicine is forgiveness. What healing wisdom gets unlocked within our body as we practice the art of self-forgiveness and self-acceptance? Why is self-forgiveness a requirement of love and compassion? And how do you cultivate a practice of self-forgiveness that has the power to heal, honor, and liberate yourself, ancestors, and generations to come? So, if you are ready to turn your mess into your medicine, welcome home. Your journey won't be easy, but I promise it will be worth it. Now let's dive in. Okay, I would like to say hello and welcome to Gabriel Keczan. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Great to be here with you, Nicole.
I'm so excited to have you. We spoke a few months ago, and one of the reasons why I think we sat down to have the conversation in the first place has to do with your work specifically with men and the transition and the rites of passage with men that have been long forgotten, that we really need to start bringing back and embodying within our culture and our society to try and find this harmonious balance and get back into the rhythms of nature and who we innately are. So I would love it if you could just maybe give yourself a quick introduction and let us know what you do, who you are, and your mission that you're here to fulfill.
Wonderful. Well, I'm living in Western Canada. I'm a dad. I'm a stepdad. I'm a husband. I'm a coach and therapist. And my specialization is working with men inside of transformation and personal growth. The real focus of the work is purpose work, because in my experience, men accelerate through growth and transformation when they get clarity on purpose, on their purpose and what they're here for. So part of my mission is connecting men and awakening men and uplifting men into that full expression of the freedom inside of their purpose. And that's messy work, because there's layers and layers of stuff to let go of in order to get there, and lots of hustle and grind to build out the visions on the other side of that work of purpose work. So it's partly personal growth, and then, building in the world through business growth and networking as well. It's actually my contribution to an ongoing movement that's happening globally of men waking up, lifting each other up, and reconnecting with the sacred powers of what it even means to be a man and what's possible when we're fully expressing our creativity and our potential.
This is the kind of work that you can't really learn through a book. You really have to experience and embody, and it tends to be our individual lessons and our own personal growth and trajectory that leads us to this kind of work, because you really, again, it has to be experiential, and you have to know what it is that you are teaching and guiding people through. So how did you find this path for yourself?
I think it was really a process of surrender. And I'll nutshell version it. When I was, I mean, I'm now in my mid 40s, but in my late teens, I went through my own dark night of the soul early in life at about 18. And I had a crisis. I ended up actually in a psych wing. And in the absence of those ritual structures of rites of passage, that's the inversion of where people end up when they're having awakenings. And as we know now, mental illness and spiritual emergence have this really interesting intersection place. So fast forward about 10 years, I'd been living out west and followed some friends to a Lakota Sundance to support the ceremony, and had some powerful eye openings to the drum, the culture, the prayer, the ancient spiritual way of life that is that warrior man-making culture, and ended up having a 9-year relationship with that way of life, the Sundance. And that really was a huge rite of passage for me. And then I turned around and I was trying to figure out what to do with that in a world where most people don't even know that stuff even exists anymore, at least my people, non-native people. So I got into art therapy, and I trained as an art therapist and also as a somatic facilitator, doing somatic trauma work. And then on the other side of that, doing lots of men's groups and really digging into the myth and poetry underneath this men's work phenomenon, and just seeing sort of my zone of genius of creating spaces where men can grow and transform and be confronted with an ethic of carefrontation. Like, what I notice is men need to be confronted with the lies we tell ourselves in order to unlock and liberate the deeper truth of who we are. So that's why I say men's work is messy. And it was just more of a peeling away and a process of surrender. And even in the last few years, expanding into coaching and doing transformational coaching beyond my therapy practice, because even therapy falls short for a lot of men, because we can only talk about things so long. We need to do, we need to take action, and we need to invest in our growth and transformation.
I definitely resonate with what you're saying from your personal experience, and going through these trials that can feel like what would be allopathically and culturally defined as mental illness and mental disorder, and having it really just being like this soul crushing experience where you're starting to come into that beingness and connection to something that's much bigger than yourself. And it's kind of like that void where you realize that we've been like intrinsically separated from our core and our self and our soul. And if you buy into the cultural ideologies, then you are labeled, you're diagnosed, you are medicated, and it just further suppresses and pushes us into that dark hole. And I went through it more through corporate burnout and being so misaligned with what I was doing versus what I felt my soul wanted me to do. And it brought me to my knees, and you end up going through this process of surrender that turns your world completely upside down. And it's not like a one-time process. It's very layered. So when you say you have like a dark night of the soul, it's like, well, you have one, and then maybe you have two, and then maybe you have 10. It's like this ongoing evolution, but it becomes more beautiful the deeper that you go into it. But there is intrinsic differences between women and men and how we go through that process. Because as you said, men can only talk so much, and there has to be some sort of physicality to it. And I'd love to hear a little bit more of how you, through your processes, really start to connect with other men to be able to pull them into those uncomfortable places where we've socially been told it's not okay to go, because that's not what it is to be a man, because we have so fundamentally inverted what it is to be a man.
Well, I feel like there's a timing to it. Like you said, the dark night of the soul can be ongoing. And when men are ready to do the work, it's usually at crisis moments where they're up against the wall or they're in between a rock and a hard place. And that's usually what catalyzes the transformation and the power move of asking for help, which really brings up the main differences that I notice men and women experience shame differently and the way we're conditioned. And for guys, the script that we're handed is don't show weakness, don't be weak. And so that's, demonizing the intuitive, demonizing the feminine inside of us, and just suck it up and don't talk about it and just keep going, And in a world as in crisis as ours is, especially even economically, there's a lot of men in a lot of crisis. And so we're in a Kairos moment. So it's actually really easy right now to find men ready to do the work, and men are more ready to do the work now than ever before, and actually confront the lies in their personal sphere and start breaking them and start to liberate those powerful truths. And there's also something that I like to name, that's the male mode of feeling, and that we are embodied differently, and the literal vibration that the male body is at in terms of frequency is different. And when you get a group of guys in a room, and you get a group of guys in a room getting real together, getting honest ruthlessly with each other, there's some alchemy there that cannot happen if there's a woman in the room. And I'm sure the inverse is true as well. But that's part of the magic of men's work, is just getting real in a place where guys can relate, using the metaphors that we tend to use, which may be different, and the embodied knowledge, which also is different. And on a primal level, just sink into those warrior hunter powers that tend to get repressed and squished out of most academic places or, corporate places too.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I think when men come together, we're used to that looking like a very specific dynamic. So men may say, well, I do come together, I'm on a sports team, or I don't know, they have social gatherings, et cetera, with their friends. That's a different dynamic. And there tends to be, especially when we get into social settings, when you may involve alcohol or any other types of competition, a different lens is placed on those types of interactions. So how does that differ, being in community with men in a more competitive nature? How does that differ from being in more of a circle space where you're there with a different intention?
Intention is the name of the game. It's what intention is set for the space that creates what's possible. And it's, what is it that saying? I think it's like in Dante's Inferno, one of the levels of hell is proximity without intimacy. So you can be with people, you can be playing a soccer game or doing whatever, but if you're not able to get real with them about what's going on for you, then that's a level of hell. So the intention is also to confront one of the big taboos, which is power. And also not only power as a taboo and personal power, but the question of men and power, because there's all sorts of assumptions and around the myth of male power, and men assuming that we have all the power, even, across ideologies. But boots on the ground, men feeling powerless, men feeling desperate, men feeling in desperation because they may be living into some lies that they've internalized or that they've subscribed to, and may not be aligned with who they are and their true purpose. And what I've seen is that when men tap into that and they know who they are and why they're here, then the whole road opens up and all this acceleration happens and things start to click into place. So that's sort of the magic of purpose work. And like you said, it's all about intention and getting aligned with the intentions that are, going to unlock that. And I think we're also competitive by nature. I think even in circle spaces, there's health in hierarchy. Men need hierarchy. And it's how we bond and how power moves between us, and how we ultimately mature into becoming better at serving our creations and serving each other and empowering our communities.
You were saying earlier, like, men are ready for this work more than ever, and they're finding themselves in crisis. What might that look like? So if someone is perhaps going through their own shit right now, for lack of a better word, how do they know whether or not they need medical intervention or spiritual intervention? Or is there a common theme that you're seeing? Because you also have the counseling background, so you understand it from a therapy perspective, a somatic perspective, and also the spiritual perspective. What's kind of the through line that could lead someone to getting more in touch with their purpose?
Well, I mean, purpose itself is a very mysterious concept, like just off the cuff. And it's also a buzzword now, even in corporate spaces, like purpose. It's almost like a new catchphrase. So I like to demystify purpose and say, your purpose is not outside of you. It's not some dangling carrot that you're chasing. And once you find it, all the neon lights go off and you win. It's actually who you are. You are your purpose. So the real task and challenge of purpose work is to unpack and unlock the truth of who you are and also the truth of what you're here to do, because they're connected. And it's about clearing away all the confusion and letting go of contracts, essentially, and agreements of who we have been that may no longer be serving us. Usually the crisis points are like a divorce or a major ego death, which often comes with change of career. Like, oh, who am I now if I just lost this job? That was my identity. So a big part of it is being willing to die every day to the man I used to be in order to become the next level man that I'm becoming. And that takes courage, and it takes relationship. It takes putting yourself in relationship with networks or individuals who are going to see who you are, and they're going to help you out, help you get yourself to the next level of your growth and alignment.
Do you feel like you're immersed in a hypercritical and codependent world that's more likely to assign blame than accept responsibility? Or maybe you've observed yourself blaming before seeking to understand, clutching onto anger instead of offering forgiveness, and choosing to be right instead of humble, gracious, grateful, and joyful. If this gave you a small gut punch, you might unconsciously or consciously be lacking love, connection, compassion, and acceptance of self, which means my 6 days of self-love quantum prayer challenge is absolutely for you. And did I mention it's free? This 6-day challenge will provide you with access to exclusive content and a private members portal to support and encourage you through this challenge and beyond. 6 daily recorded Ho'oponopono prayer meditations and reflective questions, a 24-page guidebook to support the cultivation of your practice, a deeper understanding of where you are versus where you desire to be, and expose you to the transformational power of love and forgiveness. So if you are seeking improved mood, increased creativity, less judgment, an abundance of new opportunities, sudden shifts in perspective of self and others, deeper connections within your relationships, and peace of mind, then head to the show notes and click the link to sign up for this 6-day challenge and experience for yourself the power of I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you.
It's such important work to be doing right now, whether you're doing it for yourself or you're sitting in a position like you or you're guiding others through it, especially what we've seen over the past few years, where we are watching so many social systems and structures and belief systems and ideologies start to crumble, or at least people are finally starting to question what it is that we've been prescribed basically since birth as to who we are and how we're supposed to function and what we're supposed to do. And if you've gone through the traditional route where you would have gone through perhaps public education and then on to some sort of post-secondary or training and then into the workforce, whatever that looks like. I know for myself, I always found myself in very male-dominated careers. So I had worked in construction. I was on commercial job sites a lot. I then ended up moving into law and finance and very much surrounded by a lot of masculine energy, but not just within the men, also within the women. Because I find as a woman, when I was stepping into these spaces, my masculinity, that masculine energy inside of me was kind of overtaking my femininity because I was seen as weak in those spaces if I leaned into the more feminine side of myself, which is ridiculous, but it creates, because those environments foster so much competition and just a dynamic that requires more masculine driven energy, it really can be disillusioning because it's not healthy side of that energy. It's definitely very toxic. And it was inside of those spaces that I started finding that toxicity within myself and that toxic masculine energy where I was very combative, I was very competitive, burning myself out, but under this veil of shame where I wanted to be more vulnerable. And that's how I connect with people, is through this just really honest vulnerability and having conversations and treating my coworkers like the people and beings that they are, and not just an employee for X corporation. And for me, that was like a very soul crushing experience. But being able to, because I find that we get demonized for our vulnerability, and it seems to be the first thing that we're shamed about, or it's something that gets weaponized against us, it can be really hard to start peeling that back. And as you know, part of our mission here with Grand Rising is to look at forgiveness and self-forgiveness, and that through forgiving ourselves, we're able to then forgive others, ancestors, and really start to heal the shame, the guilt, and the resentment that keeps us caught in these patterns and these traps and these beliefs that keep us living small. And I'm curious with you how you've seen forgiveness and the concepts of forgiveness through your work, whether it's through your art therapy or your counseling or your work with men. How does that come up for you?
Well, I want to just honor that this is the deepest of the deep ends to be like wading into in terms of the heart of transformation. And I think there's a stage when I think of forgiveness, I think it's almost something to be handling really carefully, because it's easy to push it or rush it and to want to produce it prematurely, whereas it's a process. And it may involve grief, and grief may take time. Actually, I see both vulnerability and grief as superpowers that we are relearning how to work with well. And when we actually welcome those guests, the deep grief, the like world making or world transforming grief, and the vulnerability, they will destroy our old versions of ourselves and old outdated versions of our lives. I think there's a stage called acceptance that's useful to sort of insert into the conversation here, in the conversation around forgiveness and just accepting what is. What's her name? Byron Katie's Loving What Is comes to mind. I mean, she made a splash with that approach, that framework of asking those powerful questions and seeing if people can just accept and love what is. I just remember seeing her on Oprah making tons of people cry just by asking them if, these powerful questions, if they can accept the truth. So I think there's a little step on the way to forgiveness that's about just seeing what is and finding a way to love what is. And then in the wrestling of that and in the tension of that, even the unforgivable or unlovable or unbelievable parts can be reckoned with. I love that you're going right for the deep end here, because we are really these days moving at the speed of reckoning with so many personal and global issues that are all forcing this acceleration. You can see it happening. And like you said, even between men and women, and there's a lot of deep healing that needs to happen. And forgiveness is a big part of that, and shame shifting. Interesting to hear you talk too about being in a corporate world that was men dominating the space. In my experience, training to be a therapist, I was trained by lots of women. And there came a place in my journey where that actually didn't work for me anymore. And that's where I looked at men's groups and found men doing the work, because there's ways that men and women speak different languages. And that's what I picked up a lot around not only Lakota, but Mayan people. Dialects, the literal language of the culture, has different languages for men as there is for women. Different metaphors. There's crossover, so the languages can understand each other. But I think that's what's been healing for me, is to put myself in those spaces with men who want to live in integrity and who want to strive to grow and transform and evolve, and then be able to come back more filled up, more overflowing with possibility, and when they engage with the women in their lives. And there's a sexual polarity that is also another art inside of relationships. I do some relationship work too. I work with couples. And so one of the tools in my toolkit, beyond attachment theory, is sexual polarity, and just looking at, the dance of leadership between the alpha and the omega, the lead and the surrender, and whose turn is it to lead and whose turn is it to surrender. And actually, what I see a lot of is a lot of guys who are collapsed, a lot of guys who are sedated, a lot of guys who are afraid to step into their leadership. And there's a systemic emasculation of men that's happening. And that's part of what my mission is, to reverse engineer, to help men pick up their sword and lead. Because when they're doing that, they're actually aligned with what they're supposed to be doing. And they're going to be able to serve the women in their lives better when they're actually giving from a place of integrity. And there's a dance to it, of course, because both alpha and omega have leadership styles, and it's easy to slip into right and wrong thinking and stigma, but that's what keeps the work exciting. There's electricity in it.
Oh my gosh, you just touched on a few things that I definitely want to go a little deeper on. So I love that you brought up acceptance, and that we really have to kind of step through that acceptance in order to start getting to forgiveness. It's really the only way we can identify that there is something that requires forgiveness in the first place. And as I'm on my own path and going through, many transitions and looking at my life as a whole and over the past, decade and what's brought me to where I'm at, I think a big part of acceptance that we tend to gloss over, and because it's so easy and it's also how we're conditioned, is we're always looking externally and we're always kind of pointing those fingers. And there's that saying that when you point your finger at someone, there's three pointing back at you. And it's very hard, I think, especially in the moment when we are in fear, freeze, flight, to be able to kind of take a step back and objectively look at the roles that we play in our own reality and how we are 100% responsible for our own reality at all times. And then when you get kind of more etheric with it and energetic with it, and we start looking at what is coming into our life and what we're attracting and magnetizing towards us, good or bad, it's always there to show us something, and it's always there to teach us something, and we have to be open. And if you spot it, you got it. So if you can see it outside of you, it's because there's something at a vibrational frequency that's resonating inside of you. And some of that is so ugly and so hard to look at. And it is, I believe, our life's work individually. That is our purpose, to be able to heal those things, to look at them, to identify them. And it doesn't mean it's going to happen right away. So like you were saying, you have to go through this acceptance period before we can really start to look at forgiveness. And that can take a long time, because through the acceptance, there is that period of grief, and it may bring up anger and resentment and a lot of other feelings that we have to start peeling through and layering through in order to get to an authentic forgiveness. And when we tend to be in relationship with others and our sharp and bumpy edges start grinding up against each other, that's where we have the ability to learn the most about ourselves. But it can also take the most amount of time to heal as well. And as you said, we tend to want to rush things. And it's part of our societal conditioning where we have, our 5-second attention span to want to be able to rush through these processes. And they tend not to be authentic and genuine. And when we're still in our feelings too much, when we haven't had a chance to accept our own responsibility and roles and actions and behaviors, we never really do get to that true place of healing and forgiveness, because we're not allowing ourselves to feel all the feelings. And I find that that's something that happens a lot too, is we'll get really close to something and then we're like, nope, can't look there yet. And that's okay. I mean, we all have our own process, but it's whether or not you want to keep going there. And it doesn't mean you have to go all in. And as you said, I'm kind of jumping off the deep end, and that's where I live. But it's there's an ease to it. There's an ebb and a flow to be able to really start to sink into who we are, because we spend so much time and so much of our lives trying to know and understand everything around us that the vessel that we live inside of is what we're least familiar with. And we don't really think of it, but our attention is very rarely inward. and mainly external, but the external is really just there as a mirror to show us what it is that we need to see about ourselves. And I know that is the journey that can bring people to their knees and can, sometimes look like a psychosis and really start to create that swift ego death. And right now, with the energetics and everything that's happening, I'm personally seeing cycles, karmic cycles show up really quickly. Lessons are showing up really quickly. Things are getting cleared very quickly. There seems to be like this accelerated, heightened pace that we're moving through these transitions. Are you noticing that in the work that you're doing and with the people that are showing up? This, I don't want to say urgency, but more of a swiftness that seems to be emerging as people are kind of clearing through their emotional debris.
I'm seeing a lot of breakdown, and the breakdowns lead to the breakthroughs. That's just the alchemy of it, is that we need to deconstruct old structures and have them really fall apart before they can compost into that new Firebird. And I was listening to you share there about the energetics. You're noticing, what came to mind is this book I'm reading, Jamie Wheel, Recapture the Rapture. And he has this brilliant trinity that he lays out for just this whole conversation of transformation and community building in a world that's lost its mind. And the trinity is that on one end, there's the ecstasis, or the peak experience, and that's the coming to your knees, the come to Jesus moment. That's the forgiveness moment. That's almost religious, or at least religiaire, that we're hunting when we're needing that transformation. But at the other end of the valley, there's a peak and a valley, is this catharsis. And that's the emotional, that's the in and down and among, that's the reckoning. And that's the somatic. It's what transforms in the tissue. The issues are in the tissues. So I think there's a tension between the therapeutic in the body and the almost religious peak experience, the ecstatic. And we find this in plant medicine use or in breath work or anything that brings about ecstatic experiences, ritual with chanting. It's gonna bring us to places that are unspeakable. And then the third prong of the Trinity is communitas. And just that as we evolve and we go through all this ups and downs, we really do need villages. We need to be held by a community of practice, whether that's a satsang or a village of some sort. We need a mastermind. We need people along the path who are witnessing us, seeing us go through it, and we're witnessing them, and we can mutually support each other. So that's also what I love about how I met you inside of this last couple of years and the platform that we met on, which was such a beautiful tribute to that spirit of communitas. So I'm just sort of riffing off what you said there. And
yeah, no, I love where you're going with this, because it ties into what you were saying earlier. The English language is such a mess and it's so tangled. And I'm fascinated by the fact that when you have these plant medicine experiences, for example, I've experienced them, and I know on your website that that's something that you work on, is also the integration of these experiences. It's not something you can put language to. You cannot put words, not effectively, to what you experience in these states, because it's beyond language. It's beyond that kind of comprehension. It's purely energetic. And the reckoning that you have when you can go through those experiences. I know personally, for myself, I literally watched this external facade melt off my body. I could see all of the masks and the false pretenses that I was carrying around that was crushing my soul, literally dripping off my body. And it fundamentally changed how I started moving forward. And now, as I'm going through, my current journey, and I'm doing the somatic work as well as the community work and the spiritual work, doing a lot of heart-centered work. So when I'm working with body practitioners and somatic practitioners, it's almost like I'm feeling my chest cracking open under this new kind of wisdom that my body is starting to unlock. Because as you said, it's, the issues are in the tissues. Bessel van der Kolk has like the body keeps score. Our emotions, our energetics, it's all kept in our body. It's all locked in there. So when you were working with the Lakotas and you were noticing the difference in the nuances of the language versus the men and the women, can you describe that experience? Because it's a vibratory experience that you were that you were having, and the language I'm assuming that was being spoken among the men was resonating at the frequency and the vibration of the masculine. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and I'll qualify what I'm saying by the Sundance I was in was Lakota lineage, but it had traveled through Uncle Leonard Crow Dog up to the Okanagan region of Western Canada. So it was not actually populated by Lakota people much. There was a few Lakota people in the mix in my time there. But in the songs, that's where I noticed the language, because how a man would sing certain phrases would have different endings to the song versus how a woman. So I started to pick up on just the energetics more than an academic linguist perspective. And then vibrationally, the men have a sweat lodge separate from the women, and the entire setup of the dance of leadership and the relationship between the men and the women, which is quite polarized. I was advised not to even look at the women dancers at times, because even what you do with your eyes when you're dancing it's important. It's all about focus, and it's quite a ecstatic experience. And so I had moments inside of Sweats where the singers who were around the big drum, and they're the ones who really carry the spirit of a big Sundance ceremony, because they're singing all day long, and they're singing so that the dancers can dance, and their voices are just cracked wide open, and they're just like in these songs that are just huge songs. And I remember being in a sweat with those singers, maybe a dozen of them. I had been invited in because I was just carrying rocks, and they said, "Oh, tell the rock carriers to come in." And so we got in, and we talk about the embodiment piece of men's work, how we have to go through these lessons and take them in at the level of bone memory, at the level of our tissues. I remember being in that sweat and hearing about a dozen different men praying out loud, some of them singing, some of them just praying in their own language, some of them praying in English as the steam is moving through the lodge. And it's moments like that there's a transmission from the older men to the younger men on a level of bone memory, of what Robert Bly used to call an invisible substance that passes from older men to younger men. That is like food. It's like you can almost consider it food, because there's a wisdom that comes when you're in relationship with those mentors, and the way that they move, the way that they talk, the way that they gesture becomes something you take in just as much as what you're doing. So yeah, something happened for me around that. Also, just the deep reverence that happened between, like, say, men's nation and women's nation, and the way that they're designed through the prayer and the dance and the pipe ceremonies to just be in this mutually complementary order. That's another thing that I can't really put words to. It was just something I experienced. And then I took in at a level beyond words that it's possible for men to lead well. And these days, the word patriarchy gets scapegoated for everything that's wrong with the world. And I challenge that, because what it actually refers to is the leadership of the men, which we need now more than ever. And not in a dominance-seeking way, but in a self-dominating way. Men need to dominate themselves so that they can then serve better. And I can even remember, for me personally, a moment while I had been fasting, I think hadn't had a sip of water for 2 days, standing in the sun. And there was a moment where a woman came in holding a bucket of water. It was a water ceremony, this elder woman. And as she walked with this bucket, the water splashed. And I can still remember the shimmer of the sunlight on the water as it splashed out of the bucket and just touched the ground. And somehow the emotion of that, seeing that water at my ecstatic state, it literally brought a tear to my eye. I just burst open because of the longing for that water. I don't think I've ever told that story. So thank you for just having this conversation, because this is what is the gold, really, from doing that type of work and then bringing this coaching and transformational work into the world. These are moments that gave me almost talismans of courage and confidence to go forward and do what I'm doing, because of what I've got to witness and been blessed enough to bear witness to and be part of.
Well, I'm so blessed that you're sharing that with us because I think you're touching on something now that is so important and so prevalent in our society right now. And I think it's because we are at a point right now where everyone seems to believe that they deserve to take up space anywhere they want. And I don't believe that to be true. Like, I don't believe that we have the right to be in any space we choose. And I think that what you kind of just demonstrated in talking about the sweat lodges is that there is an importance of having sacred space just for men. There is importance of having sacred space just for women, energetically, specifically, because there's that saying that you are the equivalent of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. And it's not just a personality trait, it's an energetic, it's a nervous system trait. And you were describing basically like wisdom through osmosis, something that happens, this rite of passage that happens when young men get to be with older men in a supportive environment that's not competitive, that is not authoritarian, but loving, and with the intention of sharing that wisdom, of cultivating men, cultivating boys, and leading them into their manhood. And the same with women. Women need to be able to have that space because only a woman can tell a woman, or show, not even tell, only a woman can show a girl how to become a woman. Only a man can show a man how to become a man. And we're losing that right now in this fight for equality, if you will, which it kind of, I'm having a lot of trouble with everything that I'm seeing because it's like Alice in Wonderland, everything's upside down. But I truly don't believe we need to be in every space. And as someone who has worked, as I said before, in more male dominated professions, typically male dominated because of body strength that's required when you're looking at construction specifically. Women aren't necessarily built to carry the loads and do the physical work of men in those particular professions. But by beating down the door and forcing our way into those spaces, we are, I think, interrupting nature and the energetics that are required for us to actually be in harmony and for us to actually be able to come together in a healthy, harmonious, loving way to be able to cultivate our children and raise the girls and the boys into the men and women that we need to be the leaders and be the caretakers and be the community builders in order to move forward in a more healthy way. And it's very taboo to have these conversations right now in our particular climate, but I think it's also important to not be speaking about it in a political way, but strictly in an energetic way, because we have the masculine and the feminine in us. It's like you said earlier, the alpha, the omega, the light and the dark, the masculine, the feminine. There's polarity in everything. So you were also talking about like that you work a lot with sexual polarity. And I think that in your experiences, because you've seen the separation of the men and women when it's necessary and the coming together of the men and women when it's necessary, I think it definitely gives you a more informed lens on how we need to be coming together in relationship with each other, whether it's romantic or communal, to be able to start kind of healing, I think, the damage that's been done over the past couple of centuries, really, in the dynamics of men and women. So I guess my question for you is, how can we start to cultivate that through the work that you're doing with men and through the work that women are doing independently? How can we start to cultivate and create this space for us to come back? Loaded question.
Yeah, good question. But I want to trap the dynamic with a phrase that I've recently heard. I think I quoted it in my book, because the pattern we could even call it this reversal, this inversion that you alluded to, that on an energetic level, we could recognize a kind of masculinized femininity and a feminized masculinity, or maybe in like down to earth speak, a bunch of nice guys and a bunch of fucking boss girls. you know, you know what I'm saying? So nice guy syndrome is a real problem, because ultimately it's an expression of codependency on a psychodynamic level. That's all it is, which is more victim consciousness, more victim mentality. but through the embodied experience of men who are stuck in people-pleasing mode. And that's a big pattern that I hunt inside of my work with the men I work with, is to break down all those places where they've been people-pleasing because they've been giving away their power, being nice guys in different contexts, and to really awaken inside of the men that lion-hearted, unapologetic condition of their roar. And when I say unapologetically, I don't mean that in a way that's irresponsible. You may need to apologize over and over and over again to continue to stay in right relationship and do repair work. But there's a self-acceptance piece around the unapologetic claim to worthiness and deservingness that is deep, and that's a deeper level. So reverse engineering that initial distortion, all that I can do is my part. But I know that there are a lot of women who have also recognized this pattern too and see it as problematic in their own lives. Men needing to relearn how to lead. And I think it's all perfect because we needed this initiation. Women have had feminism for decades, and women have been becoming empowered in our society. And that's a gift. I wholeheartedly support that on so many levels, but we have to deal with the fallout of that, is that men are now catching up in terms of doing our inner work and inner alchemy to step forward and lead in a different way, lead from different power centers, because we're not in an extractivist economy anymore, and we're not in an industrial age anymore. We are now in an age of information where knowledge is gold. Knowledge is what people need, and ultimately it's free. We're drowning in information. But to actually embody knowledge and create value, this is where the growth is happening, is people coming in to personally heal and transform, and then create new values, create new structures through doing business and commerce reclaimed at the grassroots level with empowered people who are free to do business, free to engage in relationships and commerce. On their own terms. That's what I'm here for. That's the fight I'm here to defend, is those freedom lovers.
Yeah, I love it. And what you're also highlighting too is the difference between an abundant mindset and a lack mindset. So what we see a lot in the feminist movements is, I don't have, I've been deprived of, I need to fight for. And it's like, no, it's there, but you have to show up right and in right energy in order to actually claim it in its proper expression, or else it's going to be toxic and damaging and harmful. And I know for myself, I'm unlearning everything that taught me that it's not okay to be soft and receive. What had been kind of beat into me as a younger woman growing up in the 90s, and that you can do everything that a man can do, which maybe, but not really. And learning how to soften and allow a man to lead. And that there's so much work I think that has to be done with women, because just our culture, the music, the movies, the news stories, the destruction of the nuclear family, and the breakdown of marriage, and all of these other socially constructed contracts that we fall into, that as we know them today, we're not necessarily developed to be in right relationship with our truest expression. It's more commercial and business and commerce, and that's a whole other conversation. But women learning how to soften and receive and allow men to lead, and to be able to support the leadership. Like, one of the biggest rebellious things you can do right now as a woman, I believe, is to stay home to care for your home, your children, and your husband. And it feels like such a rebellious act that could almost get you canceled in modern culture if you screamed it loud and proud. And I do feel like we're at a reckoning now where there are women that are standing up and saying, like, this is where I want to be. I want to be at home cooking, and I want to take care of my children. I want to be the model and the example for my family. I don't want to outsource that anymore. And I think seeing so much outsourcing over and over and over again, where we've outsourced and leached our power, to be able to reclaim that and bring it back. To me, that's where the forgiveness and the acceptance work. So radical self-acceptance and radical self-forgiveness is so important, because the only way we can actually sink into that is to address when we didn't know better, and to be able to acknowledge it, but not carry the shame, the guilt, and the resentment of just not knowing better, not having the attachment to that. So I have so much love and respect for what you're doing with the men, because and through the work that you're doing, because it does impact women. I know your focus is on men, but when men show up different, it allows the women to do it as well, and vice versa. When we choose to take that radical self-responsibility and start to move differently, we allow others to see their possibilities and our realities, and it can really start to move the trajectory of everything. Which is why I know earlier this year you released a book. I think it was back in February, and it's called Alive on Purpose. And I love the name of it, because right now I do feel, especially over the past 2 years, we're living in like this death cult where everyone is terrified, so afraid of dying that they've stopped living. And the fact that your book is alive on purpose, that you're living with purpose, is so important. So before we kind of wrap up for the day, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your book and who you're hoping to reach with it.
So the full title of the book is called Alive on Purpose, Unclench from Fear and Step into Your Power with Backbone, Heart, and Balls.
Love it.
And that language is entirely on purpose to talk into the bodies and experience embodied of men, because that's where we learn. We learn through our bodies. Purpose, power, and courage are the three kind of core edges of the spear tip of this book and the mission of this book. And it's here to light a fire for men who want to step into their purpose and empower their lives and lead courageously. There's a lot of tools in the book. Someone described it as almost like an entire coaching program, because it's an engaged book to open the potential of the reader, it's for men. It's a book for men. Yeah, and I'm just thrilled to be launching it. The audiobook is coming out in a couple of weeks, and I also have a course as well that's I read about in the book called Transforming Anger into Powerful Leadership. That's for men as well. And I'm just releasing that in the next couple of weeks as well. So I'm just thrilled to be on this mission and lighting up more contribution into this movement of men coming together and building new structures, becoming builders and world builders.
I love it. And I love a book that is actionable, because I do think, if someone's going to go through the trouble of buying a book and reading a book, to be able to give them tangible action points and steps and tools that they can immediately start to use is so powerful, because this journey is so rooted in self-accountability and self-responsibility. It feels like your hand is being held and you have a bit of a safety net, but ultimately the onus, as it is, regardless of what you do, the onus is on you to do the work. So this gives someone a stepping stone into their ability to take full responsibility for themselves and take those first steps. It's almost like an initiation and a rite of passage on its own to be able to do this kind of work, and start with a book that gives you the tools and the tangible tips that you need to just get started. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Gratitude. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And if you wanted to also stay in touch, I'm active on Facebook. I do a lot on that platform. So you could also look for me there and reach out. I'd love to hear from you and just make a connection.
Thank you for tuning in to the Grand Rising Experience. If this episode helped, ignited, or inspired a shift within you, or left you with an experience that you can't quite put into words, then please share it far and wide, rate it 5 stars, and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps me cultivate valuable conversations and also ensures the Grand Rising Experience reaches as many souls as possible, and it would make my heart so happy. Until next time, much love and Grand Rising.